Hi everybody. As of starting this video, I'm at 3,997 followers on Thingiverse, and there seems to be a bit of a tradition started between some folks that every 1,000 followers a celebratory model is posted. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different for my 4,000 followers. I did it for 2,000 and 3,000, but I think I was a few hundred followers late when that actually came around. So I thought this time I'll get prepared, and I'll also combine it with a brief how-to, because I often get asked how I do the models. The model I've chosen to do was something a little different that I wouldn't normally do as a larger setter or anything. I'm going to have a go at a childhood favourite cartoon character, Vicky the Viking. So when looking at Vicky, I'm trying to understand what primitives are there, what parts are there, what techniques I've got to use to make each piece. I tend to start with what I think will be the hardest, or the main bit I've got to get right to do that character. I like to get over the hump. Looking off, that's often faces, particularly if you're doing a specific character. You can't use a generic face, and I find that quite difficult. But Vicky's not too bad. When I look at his face, I just see an ovoid, I think that's the proper name for it, an egg shape with the top cut off, and that'll be Vicky's face. And his helmet is probably one of the more complex parts, but again quite simple, because for me it's a straight flat penny shape. So as a primitive, that's going to be a cylinder, just a really short fat one, and then there's two donut shapes here that I'd create, and then again you've got that ovoid on the top. There is the ridge line to create, and then the studs on the helmet, and then to me there's just two basic donut shapes which are in most creation software to create nearly everything we've talked about here. And then his horns. His horns would just be a custom cone that I'll make. I'll show that in a minute. You'd do a cone shape like this, but give it a line to follow so that it'll actually create the horn shape. The helmet's also symmetrical, so if I create the horns and details on one side, I can do a mirrored line in the software to pull that across. You don't create them twice. His hair's quite complex because you've got some decisions to make with the hair. It's a cartoon, so it's what have they tried to show here, but at the end of the day I'm seeing a cone. I'm seeing a cone that needs pulling out along a followed line. It doesn't look like it looks like it's got a cut here, and if you saw him from the back it'd look the other way, but I need to kind of get this double cut kind of view to make him look right from the front. And then there's a gap here and these two pieces of hair that make up his fringe. One of the decisions though is, what are these lines? And for me they're showing strands of hair, so what I'm doing here with Vicky is I'm doing a tube and pull that up, and then again I'm seeing straight away, to keep this simple, if you remove his fringe and do if we do this from the top, and I basically create this kind of shape, make it out of lots of hair tubes, pull it down to a bigger shape to get the cone, and then do the fringe actually separately. Do that as two separate pieces, or a piece I can pull in here and then mirror again here, which it simplifies all this hair. His neck, extremely easy. It's literally just a cylinder. Quite easy for the collar. I'm just seeing there a tube that does it. What I would do is do a cone shape tube, and then it's a section of, obviously from the top it's all the way round, which creates his neck. His body, again basically, if you're starting with a primitive, select a cone and just cut the top off, and then you get his body. And again, you might want to, in your software, to get this very shallow expansion down to the bottom. Obviously that, if you literally did it like this, it looks quite harsh, although that'll work for his skirt. We'll talk about that in a minute. You'd elongate the cone and then cut it here and cut it here, look, and you can see you end up with that width. That also, though, it does have that curved shape, so when I actually create this excuse me, I'll not start with a full cone like that. I'll actually pull it. I'll do the shape of the bottom, because I'm suspecting this isn't perfectly round either, his body. It's going to be wider side to side than it is front to back, so I'll create one like that, a smaller one up here like that, give it some guidelines and pull it out like that to create his body. The skirt, it has a line here, and you can't draw a line onto a 3D model, but to give it give this line some actual definition, when I do the skirt I'll do it in two pieces. I'll do one like that, and then I'll do one with a little step like that, just to demonstrate this and make it easier to paint. But also the skirt, if you look at it, you know, it's got ruffles in, so what I tend to do is use this technique of pulling two surfaces into a solid, and I'll give it a predefined curl, almost do like a cloud shape like this for the bottom, and then another one for the top, and let the software pull it out, and it'll pick random points to map, and you'll find you end up then with something that looks like a material skirt. And again, to get this step but make the lines flow, I might create it like that, cut it off at the bottom, and then make the bottom piece just that bit bigger, so you get this coloured step, but it follows the same flow of the material. You'll probably see that in the model. I'll carry on down, but his legs, they're just simple cylinders, so they've got a bend in them, but you can warp them in most software and bend them round, so I'll not even create anything in CAD there. His shoes the same. His shoes are a good example of seeing things in primitives for 3D modelling. They look like they could be quite a complicated shape, and how would you sculpt them? But all I see there is an ovoid again in 3D, a circle, and then cut the bottom off the ovoid to get his shoe, because again we're looking at these here from a 2D angle, so they've got this curve, but obviously the bottom of his foot is going to be flat, and then when you decimate this it'll remove all of that. Arms a bit different. They are actually, instead of just a solid a solid cylinder, they're actually a tube, because they've got his sleeves, and I'd want to show that, and they're going to hang off his sleeve a little bit, so they'll be bigger around his arm and smaller down here and back over here, so they're going to be kind of, this is the way I see them as a profile, two circles, and then you've got this kind of thing, and then hollow it out and then draw that out in 3D, and that will give his sleeve. And again, the bends, you can put them in afterwards in any software. Hands are your usual sausages, so I tend to do a palm like this, you've seen it here, and then sausages like this for hands. It's the way I was taught to do it. His main body has these scales on the armour. Now if I was doing a detailed technical armoured knight, I'd create these scales as an actual 3D piece and then replicate them across the body, overlapping them like a roof. However, as Vicky's a cartoon, what I'm probably going to do is create a custom tool, a tool that looks in the shape of the scale like that, and then I'll use that to draw these out in 3D and pull them out in the software. Back to the face, got some decisions to make. So the eyes are obviously just a sphere, but am I moving them outwards, you know, in 3D in relief, pulling them like that, or are they actually a small hole where we take them out and scoop them out? Now I think the little beads that come out, because he's very happy. If this was a miserable dark character, I'd probably sink them into the head, but he's a happy little child, I'll put them out as beads. His mouth, a couple of ways of doing that. Could create a 3D mouth and then do a Boolean operation to remove that out of the head so it puts the hole in, or what I'll probably do is just create a plane like that and pull it through so it tells it to extract it, His teeth are quite easy. They're just a small cylinder piece which I'll then put in, and his tongue here, again, it'd just be like a little oval that again pull into the mouth. Nose is a decision to make. They've given indication of it. What are they indicating? To me, it's obviously very shallow up here because they've not done this kind of thing. So that's just, in my mind, a small button that's sunk back into the head here to make that look right. So, looking at all my reference material, this is how I've thought it out. I've got pieces I definitely want to create in CAD. The helmet arc here, you know, from a profile wants to be something like that, but from the front, when you spin it round, if you just cut that out of an ovoid, it'd look like that. It needs to actually splay out. So I'd want to probably create my ovoid and then create a couple of custom planes like that and pull those back to get this out. So in CAD I want to do this. Normally wouldn't do this if it was just a plain face, because I want to do these cut operations. I'll do that. His hair for the tubes, the base body, skirt that we discussed, and legs and feet I'll just do in the actual sculpting software. So I hope that gives you an idea of the thought process on creating a character. So a couple of techniques I just mentioned on paper, I'm just going to quickly show you how I do those in CAD, just to explain. First off is the skirt and the material. I start off with the oval shape to get the basic profile that we discussed, and then what I'll add little circles or ovals following my template, and go all the way around, just random sizes, just try and keep to a size that I know I want the density of the folds, and I'll do this all the way around. I mean, for Vicky's it was actually only a couple of folds because it's a very simple skirt and he's a very simple character, whereas here I'm doing probably a few more, but you'll see how it works. And then I just remove all the lines from inside, and this is why it was important that the little circles overlap, because then it gives me a random flowing outside profile. Remember, this is just the bottom of the skirt. So when that's complete, that'll make a surface, the cloud that I mentioned before. In this example I'm just going to copy this cloud and pull it up, but if I wanted heavy pleats going down to small or something very different, I could create another profile up here. But here I'm just going to use the same one. To make it random, I am going to turn it around 180 degrees, because if you don't, you'll just end up with like a squashed column. All the little circles and pleats will just pull straight down, and you won't get the effect. Whereas here, it's going to force the software to map uneven circles to each other. I'm actually going to make the software do something random and guess. Top, as I mentioned, I'm going to make smaller. It actually has to be, you know, normally a skirt flows outwards. It won't look right if it's the same. So I'm going for sort of, I think, 80 and 90% here. And then I'll tell the software to make up the join and the difference, please, between the two. And this is where I'll get my initial material skirt effect. There you go. I think the top's probably a little bit too large there, it doesn't go in enough, but you can see here how I've got that rough material shape. Now bear in mind, this will need still some sculpting and pulling around, particularly for flowing miniatures and to pull it and move it around legs, etc. But for me, this is a primitive start. This is how I get my start, and then it's very easy to work on. To get a more random flow, you can copy it and turn it 120 degrees again, and maybe pull it out the back to get a slightly different profile, or turn it at an odd angle, and then you can see then you get like little subfolds and pleats, and moving it backwards and forwards you can alter the effect, and it gets you a really good natural flowing start. You can also use this for the bottom of trees and tree stumps, etc. Again, could just sculpt this from scratch, just start with a cylinder and pull all these lines out, just with my CAD background, and I like something to start, and I've normally thought of the makeup as you've seen in my sketches. That's how I start. The next thing I quickly want to show you is pulling two things but giving them a line. I talked about giving them a line to follow to create barrel shapes, and like Vicky's body, it looks like a cone, but it's got bulging sides. So if I just start with two simple circles here, again, I could just pull these up as a cylinder and I can just project them together. So if I just do that now, so I could pull it or I can project it, but that's just straight sides. What I want to do is to get it to follow a curve, and I think I mentioned I was trying to explain that in the paper. So if I just give it a line to follow, just move 90 degrees straight through the start and end point, and I'll just do a simple curve. I'll just do it on one side. You can do this on both and get it to follow both to create a barrel shape, but this will also show you how I did the horn. Obviously I'd start with a point and a circle, not two circles, but it's the same process as this, as creating the horns on his helmet. So same as before, give it the two things, tell it to project. When it does that, I say, but actually, can you follow this line for me, please? Give it that, and there you go. And once I tell it I'm happy with that, it'll form that into a solid. And as you can see, that if I'd have done a smaller circle or a point at the top, that could be a horn. If I'd have done both sides, that could have made the rough outline of his body. The last quick technique I'm just going to show you is making Vicky's face. Start with making the ovoid, but I do know for his face I only want half of it. The rest is in his helmet, and it's not like a proper face. His eyes aren't halfway up the ovid, they're well down. So that's it. We'll just take the half, and I then actually only need a quarter, because I'm going to pull that quarter around this centre point, and that'll create effectively half an egg, which is for me the pure starting point of Vicky's head. There we go, there's Vicky's base head as I see it in that 2D model. And then just to give you an idea of what I was talking about of pulling the mouth out, I'll just show you now how I do that. Just add a bit here to the top of his head. I just think it wants drawing out a little bit more, just something that I can sink into the hat and get the hair to cover. Might not need it, and when I decimate the model and solidify it, it might disappear, but it just means I'm not going to have a gap there under his helmet. So we'll just go 90 degrees against the ovoid and create a drawing plane. And then I'll just do a basic 2D drawing on this plane of the mouth. His mouth's quite simple. And I'll just negative pull that into his head. And there you can see we've got the mouth opening. Then I can trim and sculpt that mouth and add the teeth and the tongue in at a later date. I can do a similar thing if I was scooping the eyes, or I'm just going to add them in as spheres, but I hope that gives you an idea. So these are the parts that I ended up with, probably a little more than usual, although not with helmets, I tend to make those. But as you can see, we'll go into real-time mode here. I ended up with most of the parts that I talked about when I was doing the drawing. It was just the legs and feet. I thought they were quite simple. The hair, ended up making that tubes, but again it was a bit like we did the skirt. Drew the circles to make the hair and then pulled and warped it down, but also used the technique of bowing it out that I showed as well. There's his head after I finished it. Little button nose, as I thought it did just need smoothing out at the top. The mouth there, which I did as kind of a cylinder with a curve on, I actually ended up sculpting that out. It didn't look right, it was a bit too sharp. The helmet, that came out quite well, built quite straightforward using the techniques I showed you. Not hollow at the bottom, for the simple reason it doesn't really need to be. Nobody's going to wear it, it's going to go on his head. The sleeve there, with the droop and the hollow for the hand to go in. I did also cut that hole through to the body as well, and rounded off the edges, and you can see I pulled through the centre as well, so it was solid, because I cut that hole all the way through. His neck there was a little bit big. Here's the skirt I actually did for him. As you can see, it's a lot more simplified than the example way I showed you. Just did a few more simpler scallops, and I've pulled it out with a bias to the back because how he was stood in the cartoons. So yeah, these are the bits I ended up working with and pulling in to the modelling software. Let's take a look at how he ended up. So here's those parts brought together. You can see when you drag them together you really get the effect. I've altered a few of the proportions up and down, particularly the collar I made a little bit bigger. But that's straightforward, it's just sizing. His neck, you can see I've put in place here just to get the position of the head, and that is just a plain cylinder. And there is his fringe. His fringe is just the hair chopped back and turned around and then put that above his head. I didn't actually need to make that in his own right, but you can also see the hair is straight at the bottom here. I'm going to sculpt that in a second and give it, and pull and warp it and give it that shape that gives it that kind of swooping M shape at the back and the front that you saw when I was doing the pencil drawings. You can see also here I have created the tool and just stamped on that effect of the scale mail, I think it's supposed to be, on his top. Moving on, after using a few other basic primitives just in the software to do the legs, as I said, they're just basic tubes that I've then bent slightly to create a leg shape. The ovoids and the circle that are then sliced off at the bottom to make his shoes. There was also the little lines on his shoes. I think maybe they were supposed to be creases, but maybe I thought they were laces, so I've just put in a basic little donut arc twice on each one to give that impression. And then of course I've done my normal sausage fingers for his hands, and as you can see here I've bent and warped his arms just to actually give them some shape, just to give them an elbow, and that was just a matter of setting 3 points, one at each end of that sleeve and one in the middle, and pulling the one down in the middle and getting the software to bend it. And you can see in his mouth I've altered the tongue to a little ovoid. I think I originally planned to do that, but then I did sculpt in something that was a little more solid and it just didn't look right. It looked a bit too much like the teeth at the top. So from here I will then solidify this model, join all these parts together, and decimate the mesh to remove all the overlapping bits and reduce it a bit from modelling. That takes us to here, which is pretty much the finished model, and I'm quite pleased with him. It does look like Vicky. I've altered the level of the hairline a little bit and moved a few bits around proportionally, just trying to make him look as much like the character as I can. From this, one thing that I really like to do is render the model into some colour and give it some shadow. So I defined the individual parts, rendered it, tried to match the colours as much as I could to the actual cartoon, and I do like to put a bit of a background in to give it some depth. And here is the final model. This is the model you've just seen, and this render is what I'll now put up on Thingiverse for the 4,000 followers, subscriber count. So thank you very much. Just a little update as well. As I finish this video and go to post it, I have just tripped over 4,000 followers. I'm now at 4,001, so I am going to be slightly late, but hope you enjoy the model. I'll be putting up 2 versions of it, a 28mm on Slotter, so if you want to use it in a war game or similar, use him for a bit of fun as a character, and I'll also put up a larger version that I've hollowed out if you want to print him as a statuette for your desk or something similar. So once again, thank you for your support. Really do appreciate the followers, the comments, and also when people post makes. It does make me smile, and I do look at every one of them. Thanks guys.